Greeting, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight on our conversation with Mavericks in Faith and Culture. We have an exciting topic tonight to talk about civil rights. And there's a lot of things going on in our country. But before we get started, Kevin, will you open us in a word of prayer?
You bet. Father, we thank you and we praise you for this day and this time. We thank you that this is the day that you have made and you're allowing us all to rejoice and be glad in it. We ask that you would bless this time together, bless the hearers and the seers of this podcast now and in the future. And we ask that whoever comes and joins will glean and valuable information and get a better understanding of you and your awesome kingdom. We thank you and we praise you and we give you all the glory and honor in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Okay. So, civil rights. The first thing we want to do is have a conversation about what are civil rights and what's the difference between civil rights, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, and amendments. So we're going to start first with Neil. You're going to help us explain what's the difference between our rights and the Bill of Rights. Go.
Okay, so the Bill of Rights basically was what the states added to the Constitution. The Constitution was done, but a couple of things were not clarified in the Constitution. So a number of states were worried that, so look, it doesn't guarantee us all these other rights that you're talking about. Well, Madison was like, no, I don't think that's a good idea. Or it was Madison's or Adams says, I don't think it's a good idea because if we start listing the rights, then people will think that the Constitution grants them rights. Remember, the fundamental premise for the Constitution is the Declaration of Independence that says all rights come from whom? From God. So if you look at the Constitution, it doesn't give us any rights, doesn't grant us any rights. One of the games I play when I speak is I say, do you have constitutional rights? And half the people raise their hands. And I say, you don't have constitutional rights because the Constitution doesn't give you any rights. So some of the founders, I think it was probably Jeff Adams, because he kind of thinks that way, said, no, if we list all these rights, people think, well, then you have the right to this and right to that, when actually you have all the rights. You have unalienable rights. They all come from God, and they're self-evident. In other words, you can just think about what it is that God gives you, and those are the rights you have. For instance, you don't have the right to shout fire in a crowded theater, but you do have the right to shout fire if there really is a fire, right? But you don't have the right to lie. You don't have the right to kill. You don't. So all these are rights that we have naturally, and the Constitution doesn't have to say it. So, but they were worried about it because what about clarifying that you have the right to bear arms? And so they added the Second Amendment, and then they added, the freedom of speech as the First Amendment. So those are the amendments. So the Constitution just kind of tells you how the government is formed. The amendments tell you some of the key rights. And then the 10th Amendment is very important, and that's what we call the Bill of Rights. The 10th Amendment is very important because the 10th Amendment says that if we've not enumerated, if we've not mentioned that right here, then it's not, the government cannot, that doesn't mean that the government has power over it. In fact, it means the government has no power over it. And these rights are then allocated to the states and to the individual. So that was the basic premise. And then, of course, the other amendments were when they wanted to change the Constitution. So the way to think about it is the Constitution is a contract. It's a contract between a group of people, and nobody gets to change that contract. Judges can look at the contract and say, I think this is what the group of people meant originally. But to change a contract, everybody has to get together and change the contract in a process, and that's the amendment process. And so it takes, a certain number of states to change the contract, and that's the way it should be. And judges don't get to decide what the contract means. The contract means what it originally meant. If you don't like what the contract says, change it with an amendment. Nobody's stopping you.
So are you saying that we can still make amendments to our Constitution?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And we should if necessary.
Yep.
But I think we should be very careful how we make those amendments because it's a very powerful pen. Fortunately, the founders were not dumb, and they knew that if we did an amendment, it needs to be a tedious, long process, not something done frivolously. There are a bunch of amendments that I disagree with 100%.
Okay.
That need to be undone.
A bunch or just a few?
Interesting. Okay.
Well, I'll give you this. The 16th and the 17th, I think, should be completely thrown out and removed. Yes.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Can you guys still hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
All right. Great. Let's just for people who, like myself, who may have forgotten and don't know all of our amendments by heart, this is going to be important because we are going to talk about, I think, 14th Amendment today. So these are amendments. I'm going slowly so that you can see what the amendments are. You can look them up. Very easy to find. So it's now what's interesting is that these are called Reconstruction Amendments, the abolishment of slavery, civil rights, equal protection, apportionment, and Civil War debt, right to vote. Okay. Oh, income tax and popular election of senators. Those are the ones that Neil wants to be destroyed. Got it.
Yeah.
Right to vote, 2-term limits, poll taxes. Civil rights, citizenship rights, and equal under the law. This has, so when people talk about civil rights, what do you think that means? I'm going to go Kevin, Lonnie, and then Neil.
Yeah, civil rights is basically equal opportunity, equal protection, equality under the law. Remember, prior to the civil rights, 1964 civil rights, there was open, blacks weren't given certain opportunities. After Reconstruction, that time from slavery to Reconstruction, which incorporated Jim Crow laws and all the other things that went along with that, blacks were still treated, even though they weren't in slavery, they were treated unequal. And it was not it was just, that was the way it is. So we had a lot of cultural Darwinism, cultural Marxism that really drove the racial divide, because people still believe, like Darwin asserted, like blacks were subhuman. So why do I have to treat a subhuman equal to somebody that's clearly human, a white person? So this is that kind of thing that we had to kind of wade through and say, okay, well, the fact is we're all human, and you guys just got to deal with that. Now we everybody needs to be protected. We should have the same rights. We're living in the same place. Treat us just like you treat every other person. So, give us equal opportunity for jobs, equal opportunity for pay, equal opportunity for if we get in trouble with the law, don't give us unequal weights and scales from a justice perspective. So all of those things are kind of inculcated in a civil rights kind of a thing. But the sentiment was, I'm a man. Please treat me like a man, like every other man, and don't treat me unequal. And up to that time, there was still a lot of inequality, and it was okay. Or it was somewhat a wink and a nod, and not really taken seriously.
Go, Lonnie.
I would just add to what Kevin has stated that we were, in short, second-class citizens. So what comes to mind was segregation, so-called separate but equal. And when in fact there was not the parity that we had with our brethren who happen to have the lighter complexion. And so civil rights come into play to make sure that those things are measured, and we do have the parity that we enjoy today as citizens. We are no longer second-class citizens, or those that would disagree with us, but we are no longer second-class citizens, although there is a plight within our community because of because of the agenda that and what Kevin covers so clearly in his books and speaking, and Neil does as well.
So I mean, these three go together: the abolition of slavery, the 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, the citizenship rights, equal protection, and the 15th Amendment, right to vote not denied by race. Now you have to understand, none of these specify Black people, right? What they did, they didn't give rights to Black people. They recognized that Black people have rights like everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
So that's very critical, you know. So it's not like Black people got some new rights. They always had those rights, but they were unjustly being prevented from exercising the rights that were always theirs. And this is very important to understand. It's not like the U.S. government said, oh, we're not going to give Black people rights. Maybe that's the way it worked, it played out. But the reality was the Declaration of Independence had already said all men are created equal. But guess what? There were 3 states that said we won't sign the Declaration of Independence, or we won't sign the Constitution. I think it was the Constitution. We won't sign the Constitution unless you allow slavery. So when the Constitution was first written, they were allowed to pass. Now, sadly enough, I think if the other 10 states, by the way, there were 10 slave states, but 3 of them were like, we're not going to join you if you stop us from having slavery. From what I understand, my fact might be slightly off. But and this was a tragedy, but at the same time, one could argue that if we just said, okay, fine, go away, you can stand on your own, they would eventually have come back into the fold if we had had enough states. And I have to do some more research on that. But so what happened in this case is all they said is, look, slavery is wrong. You can't enslave anybody. To everybody who's born in the United States has citizen rights. And 15th Amendment said you can't look at anything like race or anything except for citizenship to allow people to vote. And so these are the 3 things. And it's very important to understand that, because a lot of people think, oh, the amendment gave slaves the right to vote. No, the reality is slaves always had the right to vote, but they were unjustly being taken away from them. And I think that's a very important key distinction to know, that it was illegally, immorally, and unethically being taken away from them.
Okay,
just like freedom was being taken away from them.
So now there's LGBTQ come into the equation about civil rights. It's not a skin color thing, right? And so when a certain block of people are saying, okay, my civil rights are being violated, you know, I think a lot of people just automatically think, well, if you're not Black, then you don't have a civil rights issue. But that's not the case then. So how do we, I mean, morally, some of us who believe in what the Bible says, the way God instituted and created us, we may have our moral understanding of things. However, do LGBTQ, do they have a civil rights issue, right? When they say, well, I go to this bakery and, you know, they're discriminating against me because they're Christians and they don't want to make, you know, they don't want to be involved in my ceremony, even though I'm to pay for it. Is that truly a civil rights issue? So I see Kevin nodding. So we're going to go to Kevin, and then we're going to go to Neil, and then Lonnie. So go ahead, Kevin.
So listen, you know, we have labor laws. We have all kinds of laws that give everybody equal protection. They're already on the books. And so if anybody is unfairly discriminated against, you know, in the workplace, and, you know, if something happens, they're set upon by mobs because of their proclivities for this or that or whatever, then they can be protected. The police will arrest the mob. They'll put severe fines on employers Everybody's protected by that structure that's already in place. Now, what they
Yes.
want is special designation. It's not, hey, I'm an American, I'm just a human being. Can you just treat me like everybody else? No, 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 no. I want you to treat me better. I want you to give me a special designation. I'm LGBTQ. And you better bow to me because I got the laws now that I'm going to go after you if you don't do everything I tell you to do. I need you to make me a cake with a big old, thing on it, or big things on it that may be quite offensive for me as a baker. But I'm going to demand that you serve me because I am a special category of person. I'm not your regular person. I'm a special category. That's where that becomes way out of bounds. So it's like these people are who want to try to use the civil rights designation that blacks had to use because we just showed up and we were automatically treated a different way. Most people in this LGBTQ designation, they could show up and nobody knows what their proclivities are, unless they're
Yes.
prancing in with whatever. Sorry for the visuals. but here's the deal, you don't have to be that way. Just be a regular human and just say, look, I just want a cake, give me a nice wedding cake, and then put your own prosthesis on there, whatever you want to put on there to, indicate whatever you want to, whatever kind of freaky thing you want to do. But why should I have to make your thing, with all this stuff on it that's clearly indicating your proclivity, when I don't do that. I don't even know how. I can't. I'm a baker. Why should I have to bake a homosexual cake? Ridiculous.
And I think what is important here is that these people who attack the baker, and in almost every case, the florist, the photographer, in almost every case, the baker and the photographer and the florist or whatever said, look, I appreciate it. Let me pass you on to this other baker, this other florist, the other photographer. There was nothing specific that they could do that the other people couldn't do. So they were targeted. It wasn't, oh, I am poor me, I've been discriminated. It was like, I'm going to go to this person so that I know he's going to say no, and I'm going to attack him, kind of thing. And it was not like, he's the only game in town, right? It's not like this is the only doctor in town and I'm not going to treat you. This is like, look, there's 2,000 others out there. Some were just as good as me. Many of them were just as good as me. And they've already said, yes, go over there. But no, they want, so it was designed to make an example of the baker and the photographer and the florist and so on. So you understand this is, now here's the other thing. When a black person walks into a store, they are being judged on a physical characteristic.
Yeah.
When a gay person walks into a store, they're being judged on a behavioral characteristic. So the question that we have to ask is, do all behaviors, are they all morally viable? Do they all have equal rights under the law? I mean, and at which point you go, which behaviors do and which behaviors don't? And so that's one of the first things you have to understand is this is a behavioral thing, because a gay person can walk into the store and say, I want a cake, and they'll get a cake. But if they want a cake that targeting a specific behavioral thing, then you could ask the cake maker, is this different from what I would normally do? And here's where here's where I think we made a mistake. So if you go all the way back to the time when we actually wrote the civil rights law, there was a clause in there that said the civil rights law only applies to the government, not to private parties. But they changed that to want to apply to any private party that engages with the public. And the idea was, if you're a black person, you should not go into a restaurant and they say we only serve whites. And what Barry Goldwater said is, no, you have to let private people do what they want with their private businesses. And the reality being, look, if I don't want to go to a restaurant that doesn't want to serve brown people. because you might spit in my food. I don't want the government to force you to serve me. But if I go to a government institution, they better serve me because I am a citizen just like you. So that was the big debate. And Barry Goldwater lost that debate because, and people used it against him when he was running against LBJ, because LBJ was like, no, we got to force everybody to treat black people equally. And the worry that Goldwater has, who was more of a libertarian, was, look, here's what's going to happen. You're going to fast forward into the future. And then anything that people want to do, they can force the government to force you to do it. And that's exactly what's happening with transgenderism and homosexuality and all that. Any behavior. So if somebody comes and says, hey, I'm a pedophile, I want you to make a pedophile cake. Nobody can say no, because it's a behavioral thing, right? Legally, you can't. Now, will anybody go to court? Will the left come and attack you? No, because they're hiding it. But trust me, in 10 years, 5 years, I hope I'm not a prophet on this one. There's going to be that case. He didn't make me the MAPS, minor attracted persons cake. And so I want to sue him for that. And this is the danger we get. And at that point, nobody's safe. But in fact, nobody's safe right now. I can come up. In fact, if we have enough of a population here, we can come up with a new religion, and that is horrendous for everybody else. And, you know, how about eating cat cake? I want a cake that has a dead cat on it. I mean, come on, you know, talking about Ohio, right? By the way, we do have video evidence of policemen arresting women for eating a cat.
Cats. Yeah.
Over to you, Lonnie.
Okay, but here's the thing.
Before
we let Lonnie go, I'm so sorry. Before you let Lonnie go, you know, physical. This is where transgender comes in now, right? Because it can clearly be that I can tell that you're a man and you're wearing a woman's dress and you've got a wig on, or you've grown hair out and you're wearing makeup. So doesn't that qualify, right? Because I can physically see that you were not born in the gender that you are representing right now. So someone can have bias towards you. And, you know, I thought that, and here's two-part things, right? One, it's really part of it. Transgender can say that, you know, you're, and then the second thing is that, what does it, oh my gosh, I love, wait, so it was the physical gender, and then, doesn't a private business, so here's the thing, have a right to say who they want to serve, right? I'm saying, like, as a Black, I think about the horse, right, that happened, and that the Black to serve us, you can't send us around the back. And I think that's how it is prejudice, because one could easily say that two men walk in holding hands and kissing, they stand in line and they want to be served, or, you know, be at your restaurant and you're a Christian, or be in your church, they love your church, it's a beautiful architecture, there's no other want to get married here, we want to come and be members so that you can marry us, right? You can't, where's the line between what as a private citizen and as a private organization I can do, and then what really is racism? Because I could see the other side saying, you know, I'm paying taxes to you. I am not going to pay you. I'm not asking for you to give me a discount, but I want organizations have the right to say no. Or is it only religious organizations that have the right to say no? So I'm going to throw that back at Neil, and then Lonnie, I'm going to give you a chance to come back in.
Okay.
Neil and Kevin, go ahead.
Okay, so first of all, great question. Here's the thing that we have to understand. Let's understand what happened in Woolworths, right? Woolworths is a prime example. It's a perfect example of what should happen, and what should have happened, and what they should have allowed to happen. Remember, Woolworths changed its mind within weeks to allow blacks to sit at the counter. The whole idea was blacks were not allowed to sit at the counter, and these Clarence Henderson, our friend, and a number of other black kids sat at the counter and chained themselves to the counter as a protest. They were arrested, they were pulled off, all which is again part of the civil rights movement. We understand that it's civil disobedience, so you do that. But Woolworths changed their mind within weeks, long before we didn't have a civil rights law on for another 2 years. Woolworths changed their mind, and this is why this is how it should happen. Why did they change their mind? Because they realized that 10% of their profits came from black people.
Yep.
And the blacks were going to boycott them. And can you imagine you're the chairman of Woolworths and you're like, oh, our profits just dropped overnight by 10% because the black people are dropping us. They're like, we better serve them at the counter. It's not a big deal. In fact, green is the best color to make change, right? So if you go into Woolworths should be free to say we're not going to serve you. A Christian organization should be free, not only just for homosexuality or religious reasons. I don't like the way you look, I'm not going to serve you. I don't like your face, I'm not going to serve you. I don't like your religion, I'm not going to. They should be free to do that. And then the community can say, oh, you're going to do that? We're going to boycott you. And then Woolworths or whoever can decide, well, we care about this. This is an important issue for us immorally. Let's say it's homosexuality. It's an immoral issue. We will take the 10% cut, or they will keel over and say, no, we're going to do the right thing or the wrong thing, as it may be. But that's how the free market should make the decision. It should never be made based on you're forced to serve somebody. So you're absolutely right. Nobody should be forced to serve anybody. And I think that's the best way of managing these things, is to let the free market decide. Let the pressure of boycotting, sometimes boycotting and pressure is the wrong way. I mean, look at Target, right? They decide to put all this gay stuff in, and when everybody boycotted, Target essentially said, no, we don't care. We're going to keep doing it. Well, guess what? They lost millions of dollars. They had their stock tanked. Well, good. They're sticking by their guns. That's fine. I have no problems. I'll never stop at Target again in my life. But there it is. So they're free to do it. And that's the way America should run. That's the way the free market should run. But the minute the government steps in and says, no, you got to serve this guy, well, that's not right. Then you've lost the inalienable right to associate with anyone you want.
Great point. Great point, Neil. I was just thinking of Target when you brought it up, that because I was shouting it from the rooftop on my show. It's just, don't shop there. I haven't shopped at a Target since. And that was years ago, and it cost them untold millions of dollars. And they tried to blame it on the economy and the weather and God knows everything else. But it was the fact that people just said, okay, we won't shop there. That's a key motivator for folks. The other thing I was thinking was, laws are based on morals, right? Yep. And so the line, Regina, is morals. And so if you factor morals in, which should be factored in any of the laws that we have, then that should be a great differentiator. It was really interesting how, with the advances that were made for Black people in terms of granting us first-class citizenship in America, that you had the women's movement and then the LBGTQURST movement jump on board as well, utilizing some of the arguments that we're bringing up here to justify them doing that. But I think, morals at the end of the day is what determines.
Okay. Kevin, did you want to say anything before I add on some more conversation topics?
Yes. One more thing is, if we have to serve everybody and make sure that we accommodate everybody, what happens when, these kids are now being told that they're different animals, that they're a cat or whatever. So if a furry shows up when they're full cat uniform with cat whiskers and they mumble, I want to fill out an application for a job, what are you going to do with that as an employer? You can have a furry working. That means the furry's going to be sitting in the middle of the floor taking a crap with the cat litter box out there. Everybody's going to see. I mean, how do you do this, right? I mean, there has to be a way to say, wait, we can't accommodate this. This is not right. We don't serve your kind here. I mean, what do you do with that? But they're being told that they're really a furry, and they believe that they're really a furry, which is a cat, right? So, if all businesses had to accommodate that, then you not only have your gender bathrooms, but you'd have cat litter boxes all over these places as well. And I bet you somebody's going to get a lawsuit because these furries are going to want their way to to relieve themselves in the middle of stores and with cat litter boxes, whatever. Because the schools already have that cat litter boxes in various classrooms. So this is how crazy it can get.
Okay.
Let me give an example
So,
based on what you
one of
just
the
said,
things,
Kevin. Go ahead. I was just going to mention that some years ago, I was in the 80s. UC Berkeley had a student, and you know how UC Berkeley is, Kevin. UC Berkeley had a student who decided that he was not going to wear any clothing. So he would show up at class every day, butt naked, day in, day out, with his books. They had no idea what to do with him because they were trying to be accommodating as to his personal beliefs. And he did that for the better part of, oh God, at least a semester or two. And the only way that they could corral him was not based on any kind of common sense. They said he could no longer do it out of a health concern. Because who was going to sit in the seats after he had sat there for an hour in class before going to his next class? I will never, ever forget that. And common sense people were like, "What the boy?" And then they interviewed his parents, and his parents were Berkeley parents. And they were, well, we've always wanted to give him his freedom to determine his direction and instead of being good parents. And he did this. It was all on TV and everything else. And so he started going to class wearing a towel tied around his waist that hung down and back so that when he sat down, he sat on the towel. And this went on for the better part of a year.
Yeah, he was called the Naked Guy or something, right?
Yeah, the Naked Guy. That was
the
him.
Naked Guy. That's right. I remember that now.
So,
only at Berkeley at the time. Now
Okay.
everywhere, right?
All right. Yeah, California is a unique type of state. Okay, so this falls right in line with some of the civil rights cases that are coming up before the Supreme Court. And one of them is that I believe, and I read in the article that there are 26 states that are banning gender affirming care, right? You cannot, doctors are prohibited from doing any kind of transitional gender affirming things.
Is that for?
Isn't that?
Is that on the age of 18 or any age?
I'm not sure if there's I think it's under the age because it's about children.
Okay.
Yeah.
Helping children transition, right? So here's the thing. Why does the state get the right to tell a parent? Because there are parents who are supporting their children doing gender affirmation, right? So we're not talking about the lone wolf kind of states doing it without parents' consent. There are parents who are consenting to gender transition. And why do states have the right to ban that? And why is it a civil right? Why are 14th Amendment, right? That I am due access to care. They're not asking for it for free. They're going to pay for it. But where does the state get the right to ban it? And why does the federal government get the right to intercede? Because if a doctor wants to do that, why can't a doctor do it? I mean, we're not even going to get into the abortion issue, right? We are talking now about it's not taking a life, you know, but there's now this battle, and parents saying, well, this is a 14th Amendment right. You must provide. If the doctor is willing to do it, why would we ban the doctor from it? So who wants to tackle that one?
One of you guys want to go? I have some thoughts, but I'll let you guys go first.
Well, the one thing that I know is a certainty on this is that the gender affirming care right now for children is not approved at the FDA or any other level. So all of these hormones and treatments and that, those are adult prescriptions. They have never been tried, tested, and field tested, and with multiple iterations and rounds for children. They've never, it's all experimental. The entire thing is experimental. So perhaps these states are saying, look, first of all, these children are being manipulated into believing something that may not be true. Second of all, you're doing experimental care on them. This has never been done. There's no precedence for it. These very potent prescriptions for hormones and all of that have extreme results, even for adults. Suicidal thoughts, homicidal thoughts, wanting to kill people. Last 6 mass shootings in the United States, trans. Why is that? That's a pattern. That's a pattern. That's not, lone range, a lone ranger or somebody just lost it. This is a pattern. Last 6 mass shootings were trans people. So there's something more here than just, well, why can't we just give them care? Well, fine, go through all the FDA testing, the decade or more of testing on children, and then maybe we can have that conversation. But right now, you're all out of pocket because there's no approved methodology, no approved prescriptions, none of that for children. So how are we protecting our children if we, as the 16 states or even the 50 states, say, yeah, well, you can do it. It's fine. Go ahead, doctor. What? Unapproved drugs? No. That's one aspect of it.
So the second aspect that I would like, there's a couple of things that I'd mention. One, so when my daughter was young, she wanted to be a mermaid. Do we chop off her legs and give her fins? I mean, what part of a young kid wanting to be something is justifiable to do any sort of mutilation of any part of their body for any reason? And then a few years later, let's say she wanted to be a unicorn. I mean, what are we talking about here? We're talking about kids under the age of 6, on the age of 8. We're talking about kids who, we know your brain doesn't develop until you're 25 or something, right? So we're asking kids to make decisions about their entire future. And as we know from Chloe Cole, who was at the age of 13, she was sexually molested, and so she didn't want to be a girl, she wanted to be a boy. As a result, it turns out most transgender kids have had major trauma that nobody's dealing with, and they think that because they can change their gender, this trauma will be alleviated and they won't have to experience it. So rather than dealing with the pain, they're giving them drugs. Why? And now let me explain why they're doing this. Because for every child, you said they're willing to pay for themselves. They're not willing to pay for themselves. They won't. Let me tell you why they're not willing. Because it's $400,000 for a transition. $400,000. I don't think many of those parents have $400,000. So who's paying for it? Well, one, insurance will be forced to pay for it. Two, the state will put money in. And guess who makes that money? The local hospital. So if you can get 2,500 kids to go through transgender surgery, that's $1 billion for you. $1 billion. And if you can get the state and insurance to pay for it, that's $1 billion in your pocket that you didn't have. $1 billion wasted of taxpayers' money. And here's the tragedy of it all. This is the kicker of it all. They say, they lie to the parents. Chloe Cole's parents was told, if you don't allow her to do this and cut off her breasts and now she'll never be able to breastfeed. She can't have kids. She's always going to and here's the thing, once you start on the hormones and you've got some of the mutilation, you're going to be in the hormones for the rest of your life. Even if you change your mind, you're going to be on the hormones for the rest of your life because they've done damage to your body. And so Sherry's saying, I make a decision at the age of 13. They told my parents that I would commit suicide if I didn't get the transition. Well, yes, because kids who claim they're transgender are 20% more likely to commit suicide. Okay, now why? Because of the trauma really in their life. But now let's fast forward. If you go past 20 years in the future or 10 years in the future, I believe is the number, they are 2,000% more likely to commit suicide if they transition.
Yep. It
is immoral, it's unloving, it's demonic. It's simply demonic. And most of all, it's throwing kids away and using them to make money. And this is why these states are banning it. So yeah, the parents have the right? No, they don't have the right to mutilate their kids. You don't have the right to mutilate the kids for no unjustifiable reason, right? The only right you have is to say, yes, they need this care because it will save their lives. But this care does not save their lives. It destroys their lives. Lonnie.
Yeah, I was just thinking of the young lady you were speaking of. I believe I met her at one of the conferences they had at American Family Radio, and tragic what happened to her. But she has been on the podium speaking against this this horrid thing that's being done to them. Also met what was the gentleman's name that I met him at the event? Oh, geez, one of the big Christian events, and he had become, and you can help me out, Kev. I can't think of his name.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I met him.
You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, because he was up in age. He's a senior citizen now.
Yeah.
He had transitioned.
He's the first transgender?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. He came to speak for us in San Jose.
Yeah.
So, yeah, great guy.
Great guy. And his story was, if I remember correctly, he had a grandmother that allowed him to participate in the dressing up, putting on the dresses and things of that nature, and was encouraged by her. And along that journey, what they do to these young people is horrible. But I go back to my previous statement. That's where morals comes in. Which is tied to common sense, and our laws and so forth are such that they're based upon morals. And so there's some things that it's immoral. That's why you, as Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so, can't do that to your children. You're responsible for them, but when you cross the line, then morals and moral laws step in as a last resort to protect the children.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's transition. I don't know, I'm using that word, transition. Let's move to let's get back to the some other civil rights issues that are coming up. The Supreme Court, they're going to open the cold case, as it's being called, on the Tulsa riots. Because there really is no statute of limitations on murder. And they are wanting people to be held accountable for the people that were murdered. How do you how am I trying to phrase this? So that has been a case, especially in the Black community, that has just really something that has sit with us very hardly. But it's also, and please understand, I'm not trying to compare Tulsa to the Holocaust, right? And it was another country, but the idea that a group of people were targeted and murdered and their possessions taken, right? How do you ever find retribution for that? I mean, the Tulsa rape riots happened in, what was it, 1921? So that's about 103 years ago. What do you do with that? And to what point do you think is really opening the case? Is it setting a precedent for some? I know I'm kind of asking us legal questions here, right? And none of us here are attorneys, but I think there's a sense that we want justification for that, but it to me, in some ways, it falls in line that same thing with reparation, right? That somehow, if we turn this over, if we bring this in, then we get it. I think it's more of emotional feel than it is really solving any particular problem.
Right.
Anyone have a
Right.
thought on when we hear about that? What do you think?
Yeah. Let me begin.
Oh, yeah.
So whenever the conversation about reparations, whenever that comes up, this is the example I use. If there's ever a causation for reparations, it's the specific families that were specifically connected to that instance 103 years ago and their lineage, because you wiped out their legacy. There was legacy assets there that were burned to the ground and not carried forward. So those families were disproportionately impacted because of the actions of the hateful, racist actions of others. Those families had never really gotten any kind of resolution from the people of Tulsa. I mean, there was some, hey, yeah, you're right. We kind of, but there was never really a, you know what, we allowed them. We actually encouraged the mob by just standing out of the way, just like the governor of Minneapolis did when BLM was tearing up the streets. They stood down and they just kind of let them go. And they knew that they were targeting the Black businesses, Black Wall Street, and just burning it to the ground and losing all of that legacy asset. So there's no way you can go back and charge the people that actually did the harms. And it's not fair for you to charge their progeny because their family had nothing to do with that. But as a city, if the Supreme Court looks at it and says, you know what, there should have been some level of recompense here. The city, not all of the United States, the entire United States doesn't know reparations to anybody, but the city, Tulsa, may then have to look at how do we repair the harms that we as a city caused 103 years ago. It's kind of unfair for the taxpayers there in Tulsa right now, but on balance, the city has to take responsibility for it. It's only about 200 families that are directly linked to that. So you can make a case where, look, we can give these families some property, we give them some land around Tulsa, we can do something to try to, we can't bring back the millions that were lost and their legacy assets that were lost, but we can demonstrate a level of contrition and a desire to want to make things right and try to do something about that. So that's my thought.
One thing is I hate it, and it's called the Tulsa race riots. There was no race riot. It was white people beating up and hurting Black people. So nobody was rioting except for the KKK and their thugs, right? So it's always bothered me. Why do they call it race riots? The second thing is, I as far as retribution, I think the real question is, can we capture? Is there a way to identify the murderers? Because I think even those murders are long since dead, probably identifying them and saying that yes, they were wrong, and not targeting their families, but just identifying them as individuals. I think, and such were responsible for the murders of such. I think that would go a long ways to as I said. The other thing I think most people don't realize, and this is very important for us to understand, the tenacity of the Black community. Within 2 years, that entire Black Wall Street had been rebuilt better than before. Within 2 years, it was like it had never happened. And then they tried it again. The KKK and their Blacks saw it, and they tried to come back in. But this time, the Black community was ready for them, and they repelled every one of them. So they were like, we're not going to trust the police to guard us. We're going to guard ourselves. So, and that's why Blacks need to have guns. And cities like Chicago and all, where they're taking guns away from all the criminals, but they're also taking guns away from all the people who would need guns to defend themselves.
Great point, Neil. That's what I was going to mention. because you don't see that in media, especially left-leaning media.
Yeah.
They rebuilt, which is what Black Americans do. There's injustice in the world and horrible things happen to people. That's a part of life. But the things that makes us unique and makes Americans unique is we get back up and we continue to fight and we rebuild. That's the story of anybody's life that is in this nation that happens to have a darker paying job and been around a generation or two. It's about bouncing back. I'm thinking of what was a family that in Manhattan Beach, California, that had lost their land to some finagling that was going on at the time. And so it took a number of years, but they never gave up. And finally, they got resolution. And that land's worth way more than it was back when their family member had acquired that land in Manhattan Beach. It's worth multiple millions of dollars today. And so, we get back up. We keep fighting. We keep seeing. I just get frustrated because this whole notion. Oh, and let me mention this. Isn't it interesting, Regina, that this comes up now? They always bring these types of things up at election time, and it's to stir up, the emotions within a people, especially anybody that's dealt with any type of racism or bigotry, and stir up old wounds. And they do that intentionally because it gets people worked up, and then they're off to the races when they're stirred up like that. And I saw that took place in D.C. when the young man that's an actor that me and names. You guys know I'm horrible with names, but anyway, he had this thing where he had Alvida's cousin, the youngest King girl that's a pastor. What's her name? Okay, you got Dexter, who passed away recently. The youngest girl, Yolanda, passed away some years ago. The youngest girl, she's a pastor in Atlanta. And she spoke at an event in DC. They had all the school children from the like K through 6 or K through 8. They bust them in to hear her speak. And when she spoke,
Bernice.
thank you, Bernice. And so Nick Cannon sponsored this. He paid for the whole thing. And when Bernice got through stirring up those kids, she didn't talk about any of the victories that took place in terms of the civil rights struggle. She just talked about what was done to us as a people. Those kids were ready to go out and riot, man, and jump on white people. And I was there with Dean Nelson and some others that are part of our circle, and we watched it. And I remember Dean said, isn't it really interesting? They won't let us anywhere near that stage for us to give our part of that story. And that's what frustrates me, because they do these things, and these types of articles, I think, are part and parcel of that. And it gets folks upset, because I've had folks confront me about Tulsa, and I got family from Tulsa and what have you. And I always say, yeah, man, but they rebuilt. How come we're not talking about the fact that we rebuilt as a people?
Yeah.
And there's been ugly things happening to people in America since America was America. But America's ability to bounce back and overcome is what makes us unique. I'm done preaching.
Okay. Okay. Let's wrap up with a story that is very close to our hearts, and someone who works with BLM, Koshi. If you've been following our page, we'll be sending out an email today. We've been doing some videos about it. Here, this is when I first heard the story, I was like, I don't know. And then I watched the interview, right? And you think about how you would think of intimidation and threatenings and things like that back in the, before the civil rights. You would think, okay, that happens. You don't necessarily think that that is still happening in 2024. right? And so we're not going to try to retell the story here because we don't have time, but definitely watch the video. It's on our page. We'll be posting more about it, and we'll continue on that. But this gentleman, who is of Indian ethnicity, who lives in San Jose, him and his wife are U.S. citizens. They've lived in that community for 20 years. Recently, and in the past few years, one of their neighbors, and it happened just during COVID. And when I'm listening to this, I'm like, man, a lot of crazy things happened to people during COVID, right? And people just kind of lost their mind. And I'm just like, there's some more stuff. If we were to ever document the cases of things that started happening after or during COVID, we would probably be shocked at how people's behaviors had changed. But anyways, this neighbor, Caucasian, and he has been targeting this family in a way that American citizens are doing this to other Americans, what your ethnicity is. And it's like, and not that there's justification for it. It's not like this person, Koshi, just moved into the neighborhood. It is not like his family is making any property values go down. It's not that he did contribute to the community. And yet you have a Caucasian attorney veteran who has been harassing them with loud music, with blocking the driveway. These people were trying to sell their home. This neighbor would come and harass her and come and speak to all that were coming to look at the home. And so we'll be sharing, email addresses, things where you can definitely a video. And then, especially if you live in San Jose or California, you need to be emailing your local leaders. Right? We'll have those email addresses for you. The question I want to pose to the group as we're closing is this a civil rights case? Is it civil rights? Is it just harassment? And if it were, does it matter that he's Indian? It's like if he were Black and this person were white, or if he white, you look at it differently, but you're like, and I know that Neil is a good friend and is Indian descent, but this is a conversation piece when we start looking at civil rights. There's just this sense that it only falls with a certain demographic of people around a certain issue. But it's very clear that Koshi and his family are being harassed, not only in court, but in their homes. Their emotional, mental health have been disturbed by this. So with Kevin, Neil, Lonnie. And so these are kind of our last. So talk about what's going on and how is that as a society, as U.S. citizens, what do we do about that?
Yeah, I don't know about whether it's according to law a civil rights case. It is racial hatred and bigotry. It does have all of the classic prejudicial types of actions. There's harassment. There's slander, and all kinds of things that are associated with this action of a neighbor. But a civil rights case, I don't quite know if it fits into that. But it is definitely, I think you can show racial animus, you can show bigotry, you can show defamation, you can show, there's all kinds of things that are there that are, to me, seems actionable. I mean, you can do a restraining order and all kinds of things to hopefully stop the constant agitation and harassment. But civil rights, I don't know. Neil's our resident expert. He would know.
So yeah, I would actually say it is a civil rights. Let me explain why I think that, and I'll tie it all together. You have rights. You have unalienable rights. And when they become, what is a civil right versus another right? So I have the right to life. I have the right to this. I have the right. So a civil right is related to my ability to function in society as a civil person, to do business, to live, to survive. So the classification, so civil rights falls under the unalienable rights. It's one of the unalienable rights. The way I would classify it is has to do with your neighbors in your neighborhood. So that's why I would classify this as a civil rights case. The reason why a lot of people might not say it's not a civil rights case is like what Regina says. Well, it's not a black issue, right? But it is a colored issue. But I would say you could have a white person who's had their civil rights violated just as well as you could have a brown person. So, and that's why I think it's very important that we realize that that amendment did not specify race in any way, shape, or form. It was, are your rights, you have the rights as a human being, regardless of race, color, creed, whatever, maybe not behavior, but definitely race, color, creed, to be able to continue your life perfectly. And in this case, here's a person who can't, their property's been attacked, they've had a statue of Kali, it's the equivalent of a murderous goddess, a burning, equivalent of a burning cross, I'd say, in their front yard, not on their property, but right off their property. So I would say, yes, it is definitely civil rights. It doesn't fall into what we consider traditional civil rights just because, but if you were to put, if Koshi were black, then obviously a lot of people would be seeing differently. And I think that's what's important. And the way I think about it is if you can excuse a brown man or a white man's civil rights being violated, one day society will excuse a black person's civil rights from being violated again. So these things come around in phases. And if we don't stand now against racism, it'll come back and bite us, especially as we're a minority. And that's what I always say. In fact, that's what I said in my book. Well, I guess I should show my book, How to Stop Racism in America. If we don't stop it now, available on Amazon, look under Neil Mauman. If we don't stop it now for everybody, as a minority, eventually it'll come back and hurt us, because what's to stop the majority from saying, hey, we're tired of this, we're going to go back to racism? Ronnie, over to you.
Great points, Neil. I was just thinking, wouldn't it be interesting if a slightly different scenario in that this guy that's harassing your friend, if your friend's last name was maybe Manfredi, and he had family members that drove Cadillacs and had pinky rings, and guys in the family named Bruno, a scratchaphony or something of that nature, would he still do that? Because there's the intimidation factor. Guys like that tend to do to people what they feel they can get away with, because there's not going to be any kind of consequence for that. And so it's truly saddening that it happens, but it does happen. You have people that do these types of things, and you got to respond accordingly. So as your friend applies pressure to this individual, and we certainly, I believe we prayed for him as well, that we can turn the tide on it, or the Lord can turn the tide on it and bring back a favorable result.
Yeah, and I think we as individuals, if we all start writing and emailing and putting pressure, I think, because the reality is it's clear that I think, and I say let the evidence speak for itself. I believe the evidence is there that this is a clear case of oppression and bullying and violation of his rights, his civil rights. And therefore, the officials are supposed to take action. And so, but the officials are afraid to take action. So that's where that's the whole thing of boycotting, right? The boycotting of Woolworths, the boycotting of Target. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. We need to be boycotting. In this case, the equivalent of boycotting is emailing, putting pressure, calling, asking, and spreading the story and telling everybody about the story. So share that video with everybody you know.
So the perpetrator, he's a attorney. I think I heard.
He's an attorney, and he files nuisance cases. He files this lawsuit, that lawsuit. And he really needs a taste of his own medicine, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. We need to
Exactly.
find attorneys who are saying, okay, you want to play that game? We'll play that game. Right. The problem is people are busy. They don't have time to mess with this nonsense, right?
But the thing is, Neil, is that, again, if the paint job, as Lonnie likes to say, was different for the different people in this case, it would be all over the news. Do you know what I mean? And because the situation is quite unique, because it's not just that his neighbor is Caucasian, but his neighbor is an attorney who's well connected and a vet, served the military. So there is this sense that, you get a privilege, basically, if we wanted to go there with white privilege, you're getting a privilege that's allowing you to attack this family who is a darker paint job, and you're not being slapped on the wrist for it. You're not being held accountable for your bad because of your privilege. We want to talk about this is a good case privilege. And so we'll be sharing all of that information. We'll continue to do that, and asking, especially if you live in California, Jose area, that you read up on this and that you begin to email your local leaders and you let them know how disappointed you are that they are not protecting all of their citizens, right? They're not doing their job because they are allowing white privilege. And that might be the exact phrase we want to start using, Neil. Is that this is the example of white privilege, and you are supporting white privilege, and this person is using their white privilege, because that's exactly what's happening. So listen, everyone, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're going to close out. We hope that you will join us. We'll be back in 2 weeks. All right. Until then, everyone, be safe. And we're ending now in 5, 4, 3, 2, and